If you appreciate the precision and craftsmanship of barrel-aged craft beer, you have to check out the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago. This annual festival and competition promises 350 one-of-a-kind pours from the best barrel-aged brewing programs in the country. Elevate your craft beer experience with bold, uniquely crafted beers across 13 style categories. The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago takes flight November 22nd and 23rd. Get your tickets at fobab.com, FOBAB.com.
Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. What is the meaning of beer? The answer is far more complicated and intertwined with all of our daily lives than you might think. Jonny Garrett is here to talk about his new book that examines how the human pursuit of the perfect pint built the world. But first, a reminder. Please go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can find original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. Listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast with them, Souter and Dantes, simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. You can also follow All About Beer on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at All About Beer. And as always, you can keep up with all of the smoked beer news and releases by checking out This Week in Rauch Beer by searching the group on Facebook, or follow at TW Rauch Beer on Threads and Instagram. Glassware and apparel is available. Go to allaboutbeer.com/merch. Start thinking about that holiday planning. And a few bucks goes a long way to help keep the content fresh to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors simply by going to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. If you'd like to learn more about advertising on the show, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. And again, thanks to this episode's sponsor, the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago. You can experience the boldest flavors in craft beer from more than 150 of the world's best barrel-aged breweries, all under one roof. The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer takes flight November 22nd and 23rd in Chicago. Get your tickets today at fobab.com. That's FOBAB.com. We're in a fertile time for beer books these days. If you regularly listen to this podcast, you've heard quite a few authors come on to talk about their books over the last couple of months. And I know I keep talking about making room on your shelf, but here's another one, and it's important and thoughtful and engaging, and it's the kind of book that makes other writers in the beer space mad because it's so good. Writers are a jealous bunch. Jonny Garrett, who co-created the Craft Beer channel on YouTube, has just released The Meaning of Beer, How Our Pursuit of the Perfect Pint Built the World. In it, he ties together so much of our human experience, from culture and identity to technology and philosophy to the creation and advancement of beer. Garrett is a multi-award-winning author, journalist, filmmaker, and podcaster. And in addition to this new one, he's written 3 other books, including Beer School, A Crash Course in Beer, The London Craft Beer Guide, and A Year in Beer. The latter won a Fortnum and Mason's Drink Book of the Year and Guild of Food Writers Drink Book of the Year. He's also twice been voted Beer Writer of the Year in 2019 and 2022 by the British Guild of Beer Writers. And after reading this book, it's easy to see why. Here's our conversation. I have to start off by asking why this book right now.
It's a great question. It's one that I asked myself while writing it several times. It's, to some extent, I don't know whether I want to say this at the age of 37, but potentially my life's work. It's kind of a culmination of all the things that got me excited about beer and fascinated by beer and sort of sucked me in the same way that so many beer writers have been. But there's 2 sort of main reasons. One is the discovery while writing my 3rd book, A Year in Beer, the discovery that the first ever viable compressed gas refrigeration unit was built in a brewery. And it just got me wondering as to what other incredible inventions could have been related to beer that we hadn't really considered before or had sort of got lost in the mist of history. So that was sort of, I guess, the more academic wormhole or rabbit hole that I fell down. But the main reason was the fact that I have some very talented and worthy friends who do wonderful jobs changing people's lives and improving people's lives and improving themselves. And I was a beer writer and would frequently get questions about, is that really a job? How do you get paid? Or the one that I sort of get the most or hate the most is sort of people just going, oh, so what, you review beer online? And I really started to get very frustrated with these questions and these answers that I also had to give, because sometimes they were right. Sometimes I do review beer online. And so I tried to find a way to really add some meaning to what I was doing. And that has sort of come out in this book, which is sort of 90,000 words of me trying to say beer is more than what's in the glass and what you enjoy drinking. Like every drink you have drips with meaning, with politics and sociology and science. This liquid that we sort of super take for granted as something inevitable to daily life, inevitable every Friday, has taken 13,000 years to form and a huge amount of human endeavor to make delicious.
The thing that I was struck with is this type of book, right? I feel like there are kids or people new to beer who would sit down, and you have some of these flights of fancies. You have that aha moment when you're drinking a beer, if you're thinking about a career writing about beer. And by the way, if you're thinking about it, please don't. We don't need the competition at this point. But what I was really struck with is how far back you go in 20 years of, let's call it, legal drinking, and the notes that you go back to, the experiences that you go back to. This isn't something that you could just write at the beginning of a career. It really comes with you paying careful attention along the way. And I love hearing that story about refrigeration when you were doing Year in Beer. Once you got that in your head, where did it spiral out from? Like digging through old notebooks or thinking about old conversations, how quickly did this all come together with that, oh my gosh, yeah, this is bigger than just the pint?
I mean, because I said it was sort of my life's work, there were sort of other things that I'd considered and heard about and stories that I'd read that I guess the way that it came together was suddenly joining dots. And that's really what the refrigeration story did for me. And so, I have to give huge credit to Mark Dredge, the beer writer. So his book, A Brief History of Lager, was, a seminal text for the research, but also in terms of how those stories are told. And what I started to see is all these inventions that were for beer, which, most of them, once you're aware that beer does have this kind of power and this influence, you can Google a lot of them. But what Mark Dredge's book did fantastically well was sort of tell those human stories. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like to think I've always been good at. I think that's why my YouTube channel has worked, because we've always made it as much about the people as we have about the drink. And so that's how I sort of came up with the true concept for the meaning of beer. I remember when I announced it on my YouTube channel and said, I'm doing this book, and I called the video How Beer Built the World. And I got a load of comments from people back going, like, you should have called the book that. Why haven't you called the book How Beer Built the World? And I sort of responded that, yeah, that's a very clickbaity title, but that's not quite what the book is about, because at the end of the day, all of these discoveries, are about how beer helped build the world, but all of them come from incredibly passionate, talented people that just wanted to make better beer, or just wanted to be that person that puts a smile on someone's face on a Friday, or just wanted to be that person that, in Louis Pasteur's case, stopped his friend's beetroot distillery producing sour ferments because I guess he enjoyed the drink, and so I was trying to make sure there was a human element to that. And as soon as I did that, it became a travel book, and that's where I think it really took shape, because it's very much a historical and very much a beer book, but a lot of it involves meeting people and having some occasionally quite wild adventures.
The human element is one of those things. And I think as journalists, as writers, we get to talk to a lot of people. We have the access to being in rooms and seeing artifacts or having these conversations and everything. And I think by and large, like those of us who do it, try to bring the people into it. But it is something that is lost, I think, on the casual drinker, right? Where all you have is the pint at the end of the day. and you want to know about the Citra and Mosaic hops, or you want to know about, some new malting technique, or you want to know about, IBUs or ABV or whatever it is. And unless it's a brewer that has, and here in the US we call them like the first name club, that's instantly recognizable. The people element gets lost. And it was one of those things that I have written down here of just you bring yourself in these conversations into the book in such a way that you get to know these people in a meaningful way that I do think helps anybody, and I'll just speak for myself, appreciate the beers a little bit more. Is that I guess I'm wondering, like, is there a way to bring people, the makers, the creators, the scientists, the passionate ones that are behind all of this? Is there a way in your mind to bring some of those folks into our everyday drinking experiences?
Yeah, I would love this book to be that. I think a really conscious decision that I made, and something that I've sort of carried with me for a couple of years, is this well, not understanding, I guess this question that, we talk about AB InBev, Sab Miller, well, same thing now, but we talk about these giant macro breweries as if they are just this amorphous collection of thousands of people sucking up resources all around the world, and doing
a husk of a factory, on the edge of town,
and that very probably is very true for them today. But they all started with like a singular vision and a person who was super passionate about it. And even though Budweiser is now made in God knows how many breweries, so many under contract, tastes the same wherever you go. Adolphus Busch in the mid 1800s, he was a craft brewer. He was the kind of person that took incredible new technologies, experimented with them, applied them in ways he didn't necessarily expect to work. He pushed technology and brewing process further than it ever has, in the same ways that people doing 40 grams per liter dry hops on dippers did. And that's been lost over 150 years to a very real extent, but these brands still have those characters. And I spent hours digging around the archives at AB InBev for the writing of this book, looking at, Adolphus Busch didn't give out business cards. He gave out pen knives that had a hologram of himself when he looked through a little eyepiece. There's incredible artworks up in the brewery, in the archive, that was him and his business associates trying to say, we are German, but we are also American. And it was a huge statement of identity, this Budweiser brewery in the middle of St. Louis. So I think, a lot of this book, it goes back to that original idea of trying to make beer feel significant to people. And one of the great powers that craft still has, even today, even though it's lost so much to big breweries, in that they now produce beer, nearly as good in many different styles, we still have that human element. We still have the ability to wheel out the brewer against their will to say, no, you're going to this pub to talk about your beer, and to connect with people. And I guess to some extent I wanted to do that for all the historical brewers that don't get to have that say. Carlsberg is one giant joke in the UK. Well, nobody's laughing at the moment because they're shutting down all of our brewing heritage, but up until then they were a big joke in the UK. It was the worst beer you could really buy. And yet, Carlsberg are perhaps the most important brewery on earth now and for the last 120 years. And nobody knew that. And that was, for some reason, a great bugbear for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things where you touch upon this in the book about their sustainability efforts and the way that they're looking at the future of ingredients, of packaging, and a lot of the things that they are moving forward. And it's a good reminder. Although before I ask that a little bit, just for context, when you say shutting down brewing history and heritage, for those who are unfamiliar, can you give us the headline and first couple of graphs?
Yeah, so essentially Carlsberg bought into the pub estate and the brewery of Marston's, which is the last car scale brewery and a hugely historic one in Burton-on-Trent, the home of IPA and of Burton Ale, and have since then, we've lost the Burton Union system, although thankfully that's been rescued by Thornbridge and by Apocal up in Scotland. But they are well known for sort of buying elements of British traditional brewing and dismantling them for profit or for efficiencies, which is sort of the complete antithesis of what they're doing in Copenhagen, where I visited, where they're building brand new, incredible state-of-the-art brewery tours and doing everything they can to restore and save their archives, while doing the opposite in the UK with our heritage.
Do you have an understanding as to why there's that two sides of the coin of the way that they're operating?
If I could ask them one question, it would be that: why does the brewing heritage of the companies that they're buying matter less? Marston's, I think it's generally agreed, hasn't brewed brilliant beer for the last sort of 2 or 3 decades, but it's still, it had the Burton Union system, which it was the last functioning Burton Union system in the UK, and that was, one of the most important bits of functioning heritage in British brewing left. And they gave a set to Thornbridge and they gave a set to Apocal. The rest has gone in the bin. They haven't even sort of restored a set for posterity. It's just all scrapped. And I cannot fathom why a company that understands the importance of heritage so well would be so callous with somebody else's heritage. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I know that there in the UK there are writers like yourself and Mark and Pete Brown and Adrian Tierney Jones and Melissa Cole and folks, and even Roger Protst, who beat the drum on this and decry the closure of pubs. And you even highlight in the book about how when you were younger, you were kind of dismissive of it, or you weren't fully appreciative of it, I guess is a better way of saying it. And now, having been in it for 20 years, you understand that. But this is also like the job that you all have and that I have, and to try to remind people of the importance of things. At some point, though, I think we all have to kind of realize, like, the general public just doesn't seem to care in the way that we do. And
yeah, absolutely, or they don't know the significance of it, which is equally as big a problem.
So I guess we, as in humanity, as in drinkers or citizens of the planet, what do we stand to lose with things like this? When some of these traditions are lost, like, what is? You've been doing this long enough now. You've had enough conversations. You have the long view. I'm wondering, like, you dedicate the book to your daughter when she is of drinking age, when she's out in the world. What do you feel like she's going to face if people aren't paying attention now?
Well, I think the first thing that we'll lose is the cultural shared space that makes Britain kind of unique in the world, which is the pub. We have already, people are amazed when I tell them this statistic, but for a start, only about half of the UK's pubs are free of tie, so can buy the kind of beer that they want. The rest of those pubs and the lines in those pubs are tied by Carlsberg, Heineken, AB InBev. So what we're losing if we don't understand that, and if we don't support the pubs that aren't tied, is we're literally losing breweries and good pubs. And there are countless studies into how important the pub is to British culture, like in terms of heritage, but also in terms of our ability to be social. It's where lonely people go to be out and about to meet people. It's where we go I got married in a pub. When I die, I will probably have my funeral in a pub. And that's not a unique thing. That is, I would say most wakes happen in pubs in the UK. It is the absolute hub of the community, and yet we're slowly being squeezed into these spaces that are homogenous, serving homogenous beer, serving homogenous food that's brought in frozen on a truck. And so it's not just the pub, it's then the beers that are being made for them that is being destroyed. It's the food culture that's being made for them being destroyed. About I don't want to be quoted on the exact figure, but certainly less than half of British pubs are now owned by British companies. And that sounds a bit jingoistic to sort of say, you know, British pubs for British people. But the issue is that the profits are being extracted and sent abroad. So there's less tax coming our way. You know, the biggest pub owner in the UK is based in the Cayman Islands. So this means that the culture of the publican, the culture of the cellarman, the culture of the local is being extracted for profit and then closed down when there is no profit. And I genuinely think that all of this comes from a lack of understanding about the importance of beer. And when I have discussions with temperance movement people or certainly with MPs, which I'm doing at the moment because I'm actually working on a campaign to get cask ale recognised by UNESCO. A lot
it's
of
ministers of parliament for the American audience.
Sorry. Yes.
No, that's fine. I was just trying to, remind people of, the government we left. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So members of parliament, I'm having discussions with them about how truly significant beer is and how you can't just make decisions on public health around the effects of alcohol on the body. It has to be a holistic approach that also involves the effect of loneliness, the importance of pubs on employment and on loneliness again, and on the sociability in a world where increasingly we're staying at home and watching Netflix. So a large part of what I do sort of campaigning wise is around protecting cask and also by extension protecting pubs as a space that isn't just a place to consume alcohol and hurt your liver, but also to, to some extent mend your hearts and your brains.
Do you find that the MPs are receptive of it, or do you feel like you're just getting vacant stares and nods back as they're thinking about something else?
My experience thus far has been they understand and they sympathize and they want to help, but the PR effect of coming out in favor of anything that could be seen to be increasing alcohol intake is very, very tricky for them, particularly with the completely understandable and provable cost that it has for our NHS, which is under huge pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tricky balance for them, which again sort of backs up my point of we need a more holistic look at this. Let's look at the costs of loneliness and depression and mental health issues that would result from essentially a society that doesn't talk to each other as well and doesn't have public spaces to meet.
Yeah. And that's the rounded part of it, right? Where I think when people think about beer or, again, it's that end product, but not necessarily what's always happening around it. And this is one of those things that I think your book does exceptionally well, is reminding us of all the things that it touches. And, it's stuff that we've all, in this space have been talking about for years. And that sort of goes back to the Carlsberg question that I was going to ask earlier about, sustainability and, that beer is agriculture and it's art and it's, community. And it's all of these things that sort of, beer is at the center of, or can be at the center of. What do you think? I mean, the people who are listening to the show, right, and who are likely going to grab this book, are the faithful, right? That's going to be the first wave. It's going to be the people who, by and large, agree with you. They want justification. I know I felt buoyed after reading it. For the casual pub goer, for the person who just likes the taste of it, what's the pitch to them for reading this? And then what do you want them to take away from it?
I mean, to some extent, it's kind of the pitch that I would give to my daughter that you referenced earlier. It's look at all the things that beer, or the pursuit of the perfect pint, as the tagline goes, has created, and look at what could be lost as a result of us no longer brewing or no longer caring for that heritage. There's so many more discoveries that need to be made. Carlsberg very recently was involved in a huge technological breakthrough in how they can essentially process the DNA of new barley varieties, which is called Find It. And it means that essentially we could appraise new varieties of barley at like 10 times the speed that we used to, which is going to be obviously important for brewing. It's important for Carlsberg, but it's important for feeding this earth in a environment that is variously on fire or flooding itself and getting worse.
Yes.
So these, none of these things would have existed without beer. The Carlsberg laboratory would literally not have existed if it weren't for JC, tasting that bottle of lager at a wine merchant's in the 1840s. And that still applies today. We still need the investment that's coming from these breweries, from breweries in particular like Guinness, like Carlsberg, like AB InBev, who are at the absolute vanguard of sustainable farming, sustainable production, and for all of their other, I was about to say crimes, I don't want to get sued, issues.
You're almost making some of them sound altruistic.
And that was a risk, and there's a point in the book where I do say, I say, like, basically in this chapter, we've been singing the praises of Budweiser and Carlsberg. Now we're going to absolutely lay into them when it gets to sort of the I think it was the advertising and the culture sort of chapters when things really take a turn.
Yeah. But again, that comes with experience, and that comes with, it's not always black and white, that there are a lot of shades of gray. I'm glad you brought up the advertisements, because that was one of the things that I really enjoyed of your take on it, and how you talked about television ads, especially, and some of the Guinness Patience ads that were out for a while, and then you compared it to perfume commercials, which was something that I hadn't considered before, but then I really it clicked immediately after reading it. And I wonder if you can get into that a little bit, of some of the ways that these beers are put in front of us when it is such a sensory experience in taste and aroma.
Yeah, so my background actually is in food, and I worked for Jamie Oliver for 4 or 5 years, initially writing his packaging. So Jamie in the UK has endless things that are in supermarkets, like quinoa packets that you put in the microwave, or ready meals, or even sandwiches in gas stations for a little while. And I used to write all of the packaging for him. And so I'd have to sit down with the chefs that had come up with it, occasionally Jamie himself, and we'd sit there and wrestle with the words as to how, before you've tasted this product, how we make you salivate and excited about it.
The anticipation, yeah.
Anticipation, which is the name of a Guinness advert. And we is a phrase I coined while I was there, which is called sort of the perfume problem. Like, it's really hard to advertise or to describe a smell or a taste to somebody. All you can do is say, well, it's a bit like this, and that's not great advertising. Rule number 1 in advertising is don't compare yourself to other people's products. So I sort of coined this perfume problem, and would really respect copywriters when they found ways around it in what they were doing. And when I got back into journalism and into making films, hopefully it sort of helped me describe the beer that I was talking about. But some of the best beer adverts are the ones that never even try to play that game. They go, that is too tricky. If we start trying to describe Guinness to people, we're going to say things like burnt toast. People don't like burnt toast. We're going to talk about coffee. Half the world doesn't like or drink coffee. We're going to say caramel, and people go, well, I don't get that in Guinness. Or dried fruits, and they're like, well, which fruits? How much time have you got? So, Guinness just made this decision to not talk about the flavor of the beer whatsoever, and to dwell on what would be perceived as weaknesses by a lager brand. It takes ages to serve. It's black. It's smooth and it's heavy. People still call it a meal in a glass. And they just picked up on all of these weaknesses and flipped them on their head and found ways to make it part of the experience, or almost the ritual. And they've done such a good job. It's got to the point where people literally make a living out of going around and finding the best Guinness, as if it isn't a mass-produced, pasteurized and heavily filtered corporate product. Mm-hmm. And that has had obviously an effect on Guinness. It's now the biggest beer brand by value in the UK. But it's also, so many other adverts, I think, have come out of that approach. Nike and all of their adverts that are about the people rather than the product. The Copernic ad is the one that I reference in the book. It's just being incredibly powerful. And in the UK, we've had a similar thing. We have every year a department store called John Lewis. People literally count down the days to the release of the John Lewis advert, because they know it's going to make them cry, and desperate for it to be Christmas. And I have no idea how successful it is in terms of selling products, but it certainly means that the entire of the UK talks about John Lewis for about a week.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes from Guinness, and also, Guinness is also, because a lot of what they did to start with was kind of sporty. The surfer advert, which has won more awards than any advert I think in history. Surfing is a sport, and that lineage goes all the way back to when TVs were set up in bars in American saloons.
When you think about some of those advertising, right? And I mean, there's millions and millions of dollars, if not more, that goes into the creation of this, to the psychology of it, to the making of the perception of a mom and pop shop, or making you feel a certain way, true or not. And then you think about the modern craft segment, and you think about some of the smaller ones as well, that had, I feel like, a lot of grassroots promise in the beginning, but have sort of, I think, struggled in recent years to kind of break through the larger noise, or have been drowned out by money from larger places. Where do you see? I'm not asking about the future of small breweries or craft, but do you see that same connection happening with smaller places that maybe folks have with larger breweries?
It's really interesting, because craft beer, because that was what set it apart, really focused on the liquid for a long, long time. And I think that was super, super handy when it was just, craft beer versus macro lager. But because the waters is now so muddied, hazied, as it were,
murky.
It's exactly, it's become a lot trickier to sort of play that card. And I think the initial response of craft breweries was pretty poor, which was to start going, we just invented words or phrases and put them on cans, things like DDH, which nobody understood what that meant unless you're really deep into it. And even if you're deep into it, you don't know whether it's double the dry hopped in terms of quantity, or it's dry hopped during fermentation and then in cold conditioning. It's just a very misleading term. We invented new styles of IPA just to give ourselves a point of difference, and everyone now just spends their time debating whether a cold IPA should be called IPA at all, if it's a lager yeast or whatever. And so I think it got lost in the weeds. And what I've seen really happen recently with small breweries and their advertising is buying into memes and jokes and things like this, which I guess is sort of the social media era's response to what Guinness did. It's saying, forget about the beer for a second, let's all have a laugh. Whereas, Guinness was very much going, forget about the beer for a second, let's marvel at this surfer, and then hopefully you'll associate being a sinewed surfer with drinking Guinness. So craft beer sort of tried to create that human element and tried to get around the perfume problem in a very social media way. And I think it's really worked for people that are incredibly good at what they do and incredibly funny on social media. But I think it's left it's quite vapid, really. When I'm scrolling on Instagram through the beer accounts, it's just endless. There's still people bouncing beers on basketballs and then trying to catch them and drink them and stuff. And I can't quite understand what we're trying to achieve here, but I do think that this is where craft should still have an edge. That human element is incredibly powerful, and you even see it whenever I drink a Sierra Nevada and I see the words family owned and argued over. Just the most beautiful tagline that just explains exactly what they're about. And it's touch points like that are simple but mean something that breweries need to find.
Yeah, it's that lack of identity, I think, and I'm the same way. If I'm scrolling through social media and I see, whatever, and I'm old enough where I don't know the trends when they're first happening. So by the time I feel like a lot of breweries are getting them, it's well past, the zeitgeist. But, the basketball thing is an example. Like that tells me nothing about a brewery, except that they're just doing what everybody else is doing, and that there's no, I don't know. There's no soul there. There's no identity there. And that's something that I think a lot of us thought that there was promise of in the craft era, was sort of bringing soul back to beer and bringing people back to beer and bringing, just thoughts back to it all. You talk about identity in the book. There's a whole chapter dedicated to it as well. And I wonder if you can just sort of unpack that a little bit, of the identity of beer for us, the drinkers, for, the places themselves.
Yeah, I mean, in beer writing in the UK, there's this great cliche, which is that the pint is the national dish of the UK, and it's trite, and I hate it, and every bit of writing that's ever followed any proclamation like that. But the underlying kind of fact of it is true. There are nations that you can look at and go, well, that's probably a beer nation, in the same way that, France, definitely. I was about to say Italy, which might not be true. They have an incredible beer scene, but we have sort of these old world beer destinations where beer has had so much impact over its society, over its culture, over its politics, that they are kind of inextricable. And in the book, I use Czechia or the Czech Republic as the example, because that is a nation that has been caught in the crosswinds of European politics for centuries. It's often had firm borders, but those firm borders have not been sort of respected by different nationalities coming in. And so it's always had these very blurry kind of porous boundaries, and yet the people, the Czech nation themselves, the people have always had an incredibly strong identity, and it's partly language, it's partly a shared history that comes from being, pretty based around those borders, but it also comes from a true and genuine obsession with beer, which was really evident when Czechoslovakia was a country, so Slovakia and the Czech Republic together. When they split, it became very obvious that the Czechs drank more beer than the Slovaks, because immediately Czechia became the nation that drank the most beer per capita. The very year that they split, that stat came out. So it was clear that the Slovaks were bringing down the average, and the Czechs, you could almost work out who they were because they had a beer in their hand. And so I tell the story of the Czech nation for the last 200 years through beer. And that, that takes you through sort of almost the Holy Roman Empire, Nazism, communism, Czechoslovakia through to Czechia itself. And always beer has been kind of like a constant within it. And you could see how the country was faring itself by how the breweries were doing. And when you talk to them about Budvar, their national brewery, quite often they'll say, well, it's not the best beer in the country. And that's possibly true, but it's still a great source of national pride for them.
Yeah.
And, the reason that when communism ended, the reason they kept it in public ownership is because it meant so much to them, and because if they sold it to a private company, that probably would have been AB InBev, who would have taken it for the IP dispute to end between them and Budweiser.
Yeah. The other part of identity, and I think I don't want to get into the weeds about our professions, but I was thinking about, when I first saw the title of the chapter, I was thinking about how my daughter, who is now 7, tells people that my job is beer. And it's like, well, it's, journalism, but, sure, I cover the beer industry, and she doesn't understand the nuance. But I think if we're in this profession, writing about it, communicating about it, that it really does become part of our identity as well. Maybe even more so than other beats that exist in and around journalism. If you're covering, Parliament or something, you're you're not always necessarily government focused, or that's not maybe the first thing people think of you, or for a crime reporter or that kind of thing. But did you have, this is more of the meandering way of asking this question, did you, after you got into this, and writing about beer and communicating about beer, did you have that first holiday season where it had become your identity, where all of the gifts you got from friends and family, or 90% of them, had something to do with beer?
100%. And it still happens, every birthday card I get, every Christmas card I get has beer on it. Often I'm bought sort of real ale in bottle mixed packs by relatives that don't really know me. And most recently, going back to what you said, so my daughter, she's 3 this week, and she obviously she started going to nursery about 18 months ago, and every time I'm introduced to another dad or another mum, they'll say, "Oh, you're the beer guy."
You're the beer guy, yeah.
And
yeah.
like nobody goes like, "Oh, you're the accountant guy."
Yeah.
They don't get defined so much by what they do, and it's kind of nice and it's endearing, and it's nice to know. It's genuinely nice when somebody asks what you do and you tell them and they're interested.
Oh, hands down. But yeah, I have the same thing. And then the older you'll see this, the older you get and the kids get older and everything, all of a sudden now when you're having the parties and it's like, oh, well, what do you got in the fridge? There's a lot of that. Like there's a lot of social currency that comes with being the beer dad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll come a time where it's a slight source of embarrassment to at least my daughter. But it's interesting how beer defines us. Like beer does stick to us, in a way that many careers don't. And I think it's because beer is something that people see as an inevitability. They just think that it exists. They just think almost that it's magicked out of air. And so when you meet somebody, I bet it's the same with brewers, as well. Like when you meet somebody that produces that, or when you meet somebody that writes about something, I drink beer all the time, but I had no idea that there were journalists who just cover beer. And you're like, well, of course, it's the most popular alcoholic beverage in the world. How do you think there's wine writers but not beer writers?
Yeah.
But it must come as a genuine, and I think positive surprise, but it therefore does come to sort of define us, and comes with expectation as well. A lot of people sort of go, "Oh, you're a bit skinny for a beer writer," like the whole "never trust a skinny chef."
I don't get that, but yeah, that's yeah. But good on you for that.
I mean, it's increasingly untrue, to be fair.
Going back to some of those things, and I've talked about this on a different episode, but I always like to hear these answers. What's the strangest beer themed gift you ever received?
Oh, do you know, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever received anything that has been really wacky. I don't think my family are interesting enough that they've managed to find something that haven't been bought before. I did get a beer belt once, with like a buckle that has the opener on it. No. I mean, that would have been remotely practical. No, like where you'd have ammunition across your shoulder.
Oh God! Like a bandolier, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, "Oh, that's just going to get my beers warm. If they're all imperial stouts, that might work for me, but that's a dangerous precedent as well."
The other reason I brought up holidays is because they are coming up, and for the beer person in your life, or if it's you, put it on your wish list. This book by Jonny Garrett, The Meaning of Beer, How Our Pursuit of the Perfect Pint Built the World, should absolutely be on all of your gift lists for both receiving and giving. Before I let you go, Jonny, I want to ask you the Green Door question. And the premise is on the television show The Good Place, in the final season, they introduced this concept of a green door where the characters can walk through it and do whatever they want with whoever they want. And so if we had a green door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended and you could walk through it and be at any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
I would I would like to be at the Alchemist Taproom, drinking Focal Banger with Louis Pasteur, asking him about whether he knew the impact of the research he was doing and how it would save millions of lives when it came to surgery. And I'd like a guy from Carlsberg, modern day, just within earshot, hearing why he shouldn't close down any more heritage breweries.
I like that he's just within earshot, not at your table, not welcome
No,
at
he's
the
not allowed to be
table.
part. No,
Yeah,
absolutely not.
I like that. John, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for the conversation. Honestly, thanks for writing the book. It is, as I said before we went on, I'm so mad at how good this book is, and I say that as a writer, and also a fan of beer. The book is called "The Meaning of Beer: How Our Pursuit of the Perfect Pint Built the World." It's available now where all fine books are sold. You should go buy it if you're listening to this right now. And the author is Jonny Garrett. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, John.
Questions, comments, guest suggestions, it's easy. You can email me. It's John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com. A reminder, go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, our merch page, and read great new content, as well as the archives, which go all the way back to 1979. Follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Speaking of that, here is a word from this week's sponsor.
If you appreciate the precision and craftsmanship of barrel-aged craft beer, you have to check out the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago. This annual festival and competition promises 350 one-of-a-kind pours from the best barrel-aged brewing programs in the country. Elevate your craft beer experience with bold, uniquely crafted beers across 13 style categories. The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago takes flight November 22nd and 23rd. Get your tickets at fobab.com, FOBAB.com.
How could you forget? All About Beer has a podcast channel. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And check out probrewer.com each week for original articles from the All About Beer team. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music. Jeff Quinn designed our logo. I'm John Holl. New episodes release every Wednesday. And that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.